Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next session here. Thanks for joining. I'm Matt Savas from the Lean Enterprise Institute, and it's my privilege to welcome our speaker, Lex Schroeder. Lex is a lean coach and communications leader who helps organizations navigate the future of work. She is currently a senior manager of technology transformation enablement at Ryder Systems, and she also writes for Harvard Business School's Race, Gender, and Equity Initiative. From 2020 to 2022, she was a senior program manager at Twitter's operational design and effectiveness team, where she used lean thinking in practice to create a safer platform and help Twitter deliver on its original mission of advancing the public conversation. Lex got her start at the Lean Enterprise Institute and was founding editor of the Lean Post. She served as director of strategy for a national nonprofit dedicated to gender parity in leadership and is the editor of numerous books, including Moving Money for Impact, A Guide to Gender Lens Investing by Tootie B. Scott, Transforming Leader Paradigms, Evolve from Blanket Solutions to Problem Solving for Complexity by Jim Luckman and Olga Flory, and Follow the Learner, The Role of Leader in Creating a Lean Culture by Dr. Sami Bari. With that, I'll hand things over to Lex.
Thank you, Matt. I'm really excited to be here. It's a brief half hour, but I think we'll get a lot done together. I became really engaged in this topic because I believe very much in diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. And then I sort of had to reflect on my own experience in the working world and what made the difference for me as a woman and an LGBT person who grew up working class, and as someone who believes very much in racial justice and all forms of belonging and justice. And then I had to reflect as well on what I appreciated about lean thinking in practice that sometimes isn't talked about. So this is a workshop on A3 thinking, but it's really on A3 thinking as a way of creating more inclusive strategies and work cultures. And I put the more in there in parentheses because obviously no tool can create an inclusive work environment, and I don't want to say that it could. But some processes are more equitable or inclusive than others in terms of respecting people's full intelligence and allowing for collective intelligence to emerge. So I want to thank you all for being here. I'd love to start with just some introductions. I can't see you all and we can't talk, but if you could write in the chat who you are, that would be great. I'll get to you if you could write just who you are, what you do for work, if you can, or what you're interested in and why you're here. If you could just, and where you're based in the chat, just a few lines. We're going to take a moment to see who's in the room. Then we're going to talk about what A3 thinking is, which will be a little bit repetitive for some of you, but then we'll go through what does it have to do with inclusion, because that's not necessarily obvious. Matt is going to watch the chat for me and let me know when there are questions. So thank you so much, Matt Savas. We'll talk about practical applications, not just of A3 thinking, but of A3 thinking sort of from this lens and with this approach. And then we'll take questions from you all that I hope you can write into the chat. So thank you again for being here. Matt, will you just read out a couple from the chat? Do you
Yeah,
know who's in
sure.
the room?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and yeah, use the Q&A, everybody. It looks like the chat is disabled for us. Sorry about that. But yeah, we've got some people coming in here, Lex. First one was Emma from New Zealand, all the way from New Zealand. Very cool. We have Sunny from California. We have Sue O'Neill from Australia. Another Anne Marie from Australia. We have, ooh, my French is so bad. Arnaud from France. I'm sure I pronounced that very incorrectly. Oh gosh, Sunit. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. From New Zealand. A lot of people from New Zealand here, Lex.
It's wonderful. I
More
want to see
people
New
from New
Zealand
Zealand.
someday. This is
Poland, Colorado, El Salvador. Oh, this is really cool.
awesome.
Vancouver. Very nice. Hawaii.
Welcome,
Awesome.
welcome. Does anybody say why they showed up?
Why did they come? Everybody,
Not
post
yet.
why did you come here in the Q&A, everybody. Good crowd here too.
Oh, someone raised their hand. Okay.
Yeah, well,
Okay. So we'll get started, but
applying
if
lean to IT. Sorry, Lex. They're
go
coming
ahead.
in now. Immerse myself in lean. I'm here to learn something about lean. Our hospital system using A3s as a primary planning process. A3s are harder to practice than they look. Want to further explore A3. So a lot of A3.
Awesome.
A lot of people here for
A lot of
A3.
A3. Okay, that's fine. I geek out on A3 too, so this is good. So I want to start by sharing sort of a bit about how I was taught A3 thinking in practice, and then how I've begun to coach others. So I don't want to take credit, of course, for A3 thinking. I want to give Toyota all the Toyota production system and all those brilliant folks all the credit, but also my coaches, John Shook and Margie Hagany and John O'Donnell, who are my primary coaches on A3 thinking. And I think I didn't know how unique it was that to have that kind of coaching experience for about a decade. And then when I reflected, I was like, wow, I've learned a tremendous, tremendous amount. And the way it was taught to me, which I try to share with others, is that first and foremost, it's a tool for dialogue. So yes, it helps you build a more effective strategy or solve problems more effectively, of course. But it is really a tool to listen to yourself better. It is a tool and a process to listen to others better. And it's in that dialogue where the magic of that collective sense making happens. And so this workshop is kind of grounded in that gratitude that I have for the A3 thinking process and my coaches, and how I was trusted to lead strategic initiatives using the A3 process, and how much it served me in my career, not only at LEI, but at various different posts, and most recently at Twitter and Writer. And so I describe it first and foremost, like I said, a tool for dialogue and listening. It's a structure for capturing your thinking, your own knowledge, and making your work and your thinking visible. And I think that is also pretty paramount. It's a way to capture also other knowledge happening across the organization or across the team. In that way, it's very respectful, right? If you can collect the facts in the current condition section, often that's where people get credit for work that they're not necessarily given credit for. Course, it has to be related to what you're doing in your project or initiative, but it's where you really begin to appreciate how many people are working so hard every day to get something done. And it's a process, a very scientific, process based on the scientific method PDCA for running experiments. And so we'll get to more of the actual mechanics of it. But it's a process where you start really clearly with your purpose or your problem statement, depending on whether you're using a strategy A3 or a problem solving A3. And I love the strategy ones, but this is sort of depending on that. Either way, you need a really clear purpose or problem statement, and everything has to flow from there. And then that's where you get that rigor of plan, do, check, act, the scientific method. And then when you do that, you sort of have healthy distance from your work, and you can run experiments to see if you can actually go out there and achieve your purpose. So this is really broad strokes, high level, but I wanted to just name sort of the three takeaways that I want everybody to know. And dialogue is like kind of the least sexy, but most important thing. When I was first taught A3 thinking, I kind of didn't love it. It felt too rigid. It felt not human. And the more I worked with it, and because of the coaches that I had, it became this incredible scaffolding for a very thoughtful conversation, which allowed my own creativity and the creativity of others to show up. So we're going to get into that more. Creativity right alongside rigor. So what I'm also saying, and this is not necessarily what Toyota says, I certainly haven't read it anywhere, is that it is also a more inclusive process by design because of that dialogue piece, right? So I'm saying it's a more inclusive process for doing strategy and working with colleagues that can help people feel respected for their intelligence and for their contributions to the team. So the very act of, let's pretend it's the 80s or the 90s again, and you're in your office, and more people are working in offices than remote. I was taught you take your A3, you just fill out the left side of it, and we'll get into the mechanics again later, but you take just the left. You don't even worry about the plan yet. And you walk to someone's office and you say, help me think. This is what I've got so far. This is what I think we need to do. And this is what I think my purpose statement is, or this is what I think is going on for the true current conditions. And I need you. I need your brain on this too, right? Not just to your supervisor, but to your colleagues as well, left and right. So just that act can help people feel really respected in the workplace, which I think is critical when we talk about honoring people and honoring DEIB, which I don't think there should be any backlash about. I think it's just a wonderful thing in the world. So let's go over the A3 piece now and just what it is. It's really, really deceptively simple. The background, we'll get into the details in a moment, but that's where with a basic strategy A3, and there's some variation if you do a problem solving A3, but that's where you sort of set the foundation of everything, your purpose or your problem statement. And it can be exploratory as long as you're really clear what you're doing. And you got to get alignment with whoever you need to have alignment with, your leader or your colleagues, on exactly what you're setting out to do. That flows into the true current conditions, which I think is the trickiest section, precisely because it is so seemingly easy. I have been reminded 1,000 times, and I always remind my colleagues when I'm coaching, that that is the place where you don't just fill in what's going on with the thing you're doing, your project or your initiative, or the problem you're trying to solve. That is the place where you fill in what's going on in the business or the larger organization that necessitates this work, which is a much harder current conditions to capture. Okay. That then, once you get aligned with the right players on the left, only then would you move to the right to create a plan. And the follow-up is where you sort of begin to do that rigorous, did we actually do what we set out to do? And what metrics are we tracking? And I tried to draw it differently here so you can see that that intuitive flow actually is something that begins to happen. The joke that was conveyed to me from Toyota is that it doesn't get good, your A3 doesn't get good until like version 10, right? So another way of saying that maybe is more warm is you have 10 tries or you have plenty of tries, and your first, second, third A3, they're going to be really, really messy, and the work is going to evolve anyway. And ideally you'll keep your A3 updated every 2 weeks or something. But eventually, whether it's version 10 or version 4, you're going to start to see this through line like a quilt or something. You're going to see a through line, and you're going to be able to read your A3 backwards even, because the logic is going to flow. Everything in your A3, through your dialogue with others and your own clarity and your own collection of the facts, you're going to see a clear purpose or problem statement. It's going to flow into the current conditions in the business about why that work is necessary, which really helps you persuade and influence and get people on board. That's going to flow into a coherent plan based on the true current conditions in the business that necessitate the work. And that's going to flow into metrics that you're actually aligned with your colleagues around, that help you track whether or not you and your team have been successful. And what I see when I coach people on this is then they're able to run much more together instead of a lot of different egos vying for control, or kind of working together but not working together and hoping it works out. So this intuitive flow is really powerful. I can try to recap this because this is a lot of text. But when we talk about using the A3 for more inclusive strategy development, there's a kind of traditional way to do A3 thinking, and then there's much more relational. So I have found in my coaching practice that it is helpful to not leave the coachee out there on their own, definitely to trust them, but to give them a lot of prompts. So I give people a ton of prompts to help them easily fill in, not fill in the boxes, but easily kind of begin to get a sense for what their first A3 is. So you'll see with the current condition section, just for example, what is currently going on related to the purpose in the larger organization when it comes to this work, getting this work done, and what are the facts? Lead with data. What are some of the problems going on in the organization around this work and challenges? This is not traditional Toyota. What are some of the strengths? And who needs to be involved given their knowledge and expertise, right? So that's where you can adapt A3 thinking a little bit and be a little bit more pointed in, oh, wow, this has to be a collaborative effort. The plan, I really handhold people so that they really understand that it's like, you only move to the right once you get that alignment on the left. And thinking about it as, which experiments do you want to run to try to achieve your purpose that you had named in your background section? So I just want to encourage you all, since we don't have a ton of time today, to let yourself adapt A3 thinking without losing the substance of it or the rigor of it. There's a way to use it to strengthen team relationships, and there's a way to coach it that still allows for that independent agency of the A3 owner, but still support them in really trusting their own thinking. My experience as a coach is that a lot of people don't, and it's really important. And A3 thinking can create a much more connected, supportive organization. So I spoke to this a little bit, but I want to just be concrete about how I think the process of A3 thinking is inclusive. Beyond walking to someone else's office or sending them an electronic A3, it's just the act of writing an A3 is a way of respecting your own intelligence. And so I want to name that. For me, it took me many years to figure this out, but I wondered why I felt so supported at the Lean Enterprise Institute. And I was there for many years off and on and led really interesting projects. And I was like, what was it about that environment? Because it was predominantly male, predominantly white, and it's a lot better now. But at the time, 10, 15 years ago, I was like, why was it so positive if it wasn't a super diverse environment? I had coaches who gave me a lot of responsibility, and I was given processes like A3 taught in a compassionate way where I was really trusted to trust my own thinking as long as I brought data, as long as I did that dialogue with others, and as long as I documented my thinking. And so I think in that way, it's very powerful. If you are an underrepresented leader in your organization, or a young person, or a woman, or another person of color, or another from a marginalized community, it is powerful to see your thinking on the page. All of a sudden, people can't argue or say you didn't do your homework, right? It's like, it's right here. Here's a very coherent, robust strategy. I can't tell you how much that's helped me in my career. So that's just my opinion. It's more personal than fact, but it's very powerful sometimes in the right culture and environment. It's a way as well to listen better to your colleagues. So I have also had the experience, thankfully I get along with the majority of my colleagues, but we all have people that, maybe are very different personality style. And I have leveraged A3 thinking to have a conversation with them. And instead of looking at each other or arguing with each other, we look at the facts on the page, and you're inviting their opinion and their facts and their perspectives. And just that, having a third thing to look at instead of just being, in dialogue with each other, you have healthy distance from the work. And that's a way of signaling respect to your colleague that you may not have a natural rapport with. And that's where you get to, in general, all of this co-creating strategy through that dialogue. That does not create an inclusive work environment, but my opinion is that it can aid in an inclusive work environment, and it can create, stronger bonds. So pros and cons, right? As we kind of tease out this nuance, the benefits of A3 thinking is that it supports collaboration. It emphasizes alignment, just that. A lot of organizations don't even know how to do strategic alignment. They don't even, it's an assumption in lean that you lean thinking in practice that you need it. A lot of organizations don't even really, it's sort of like just winging it. So what a wonderful thing to emphasize that we're going to row together. We're going to work together. That's there at the start with A3 thinking, which is beautiful. It increases operational rigor. It makes everybody smarter, in my opinion. And it's one of the most powerful tools, I think, for building a learning organization, particularly when you have lots of different A3s happening in an organization with clear owners and they all start to talk to each other, then the magic happens, right? But you've got to, of course, have leadership that really supports that. The challenges, and I learned this the hard way as well, is that it can expose a lot. So Toyota says, hey, you got to work with the facts. There are some teams and organizations that don't like looking at problems. They do not think problems are treasures. They don't want to look at the facts. So in that way, it could upend traditional power structures. It could challenge them a little bit. It could expose problems, like I said, and it kind of asks people to do that hard, courageous work of thinking differently and thinking together. For lone wolves or for people who are kind of only in it for themselves, that's a challenge. So I don't want to say that everybody's in on this idea of collective intelligence, because we know that that's not true. But if you have a supportive work culture, you have supportive, respectful leaders, it can be very powerful for continuing to increase positive organizational behaviors. So this is just kind of emphasizing this point. A3 thinking can do a lot of things. It can't get rid of bias or internal politics. It can't get rid of cultural barriers like leaders who say everything is urgent, or people who hoard information, or a general lack of trust or top-down authoritative management. It's not going to get you past that, right? For people who are under-resourced and underrepresented leaders and groups that are under-resourced, it's not going to change those funding gaps. It may make visible, right? You may do some really powerful work and make funding gaps and resource issues visible with A3 thinking, but it doesn't, kind of address all of these things. So I just wanted to name that. The key idea that I want to emphasize before we get to Q&A really soon is that the A3 thinking is this sort of living, breathing document, as we all say. And any good piece of work has to have that living, breathing quality, because it's responding to what is the facts, and then it responds to the nature of life. which is change, in my opinion, and many others. And so in this way, A3 thinking, when it's used with care, it can create more inclusive work and cultures and support change and the emergence of new fabulous things or very cool projects or, wonderful products to emerge in an organization or a team. I sort of write and think a lot about A3 thinking and lean thinking in practice and its intersection with other systems thinking methodologies like living systems. And that gets me really excited when you've got a tool or a process that allows for knowledge to emerge and this key theme of emergence. Um, these are a couple of scenarios that I just want to leave you with. So, you can use the A3 thinking process a bunch of different ways. People often think they need to be assigned it. No, that might be what happens where you're given an assignment and you need to lead an initiative or project and you lean on A3 thinking to help you do that. But it might also be, and this is where we get to the topic of this workshop, that you're driving a change that only you can see is necessary or possible. And maybe other people would support it, but they can't see it yet. I had this experience at LEI and Twitter and other places, and it gives you a way to document what you see and what you think you want to make happen with your colleagues, and to have that conversation in a way that's maybe less nerve-wracking. Scenario 3, you might want to you're building something new and you know that you need to co-develop it with someone else. So instead of just socializing your A3 and taking it to your leader and taking it to your colleagues, you might start out, even though you're the clear owner of the A3, you might start out from the start co-developing it with another leader on another team across the organization. This is one of my favorite quotes about A3 thinking. I believe this is a picture from Managing to Learn by John Shook, but David Verbal, one of my teachers and coaches as well, he wrote a piece called What I Learned About Planning at Toyota. And he described the process, this cascading A3s process, as a way to build agreement. And he said, in North America, we tend to create a plan in isolation, announce it, and spend effort in execution, explaining what we want to do and why, trying to get alignment so that we can proceed. At Toyota, the opposite was the case. Planning was a process of building agreement and alignment as you develop a plan. And I just thought that was one of the most beautiful ideas, right? Like, what a thought that we could stay in relationship while building agreement and alignment as you develop a plan. It's a much more relational, connected, respectful thing to do. And in that way, can aid in a more inclusive work environment. The inverse is also true, right? Like, I guess not inverse, but the related idea of if you have more people from diverse backgrounds and skill sets contributing to a strategy, it's going to be stronger. But to do that, you need that strength of relationship and dialogue. So this is just a reminder of, if we had more time, we'd spend more time with this and kind of, if I could hear your voices, play with this a little bit. But I would love to just open the floor for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Lex. That was great. And you spoke to an often overlooked but critical part of the A3, which is the social part.
Yeah,
People see it usually as just sort of a problem-solving device, but it's about building alignment. And I like how you said, give a chance to show your thinking. It is a tremendous
yeah,
tool to be able to convince people you have a bright idea and acquire more responsibility than you otherwise would have. But we have a lot of questions already coming in. Please use
sure.
the Q&A. Let's see. Let's start here with well, Bethany. This is a common question I think people have. What would be your recommendation for implementing an A3 process in a company that does not have one?
Hmm. So I just did this recently. Find a senior leader if you are not already a senior leader yourself, who is open to learning, who is really confident and humble. And I was lucky to have this, who is not threatened by your leadership and wants to geek out with you, wants to learn with you, and is genuinely interested in it. But if you are not that senior leader yourself, and even if you are, you need a higher up person to sponsor the A3 thinking process, because it is going to be very foreign to people to start. And you need someone to sort of be able to explain it in their own words so that it's not just you championing a tool and a process that feels like jargon. That's what I would advise. And then people will begin to see it might, if one person can model that intellectual curiosity, others might open up and demonstrate that curiosity and openness as well.
Hmm. Um, that's been my experience too. I mean, just doing it, even if you don't call it an A3, just
Yeah,
presenting
exactly,
a
exactly.
complete thought on a piece of paper, people usually just appreciate that because it's not a 20 slide deck
Yeah.
that they have to go through or a 10-page memo. Um, okay, let's see. Todd here has a practical question for us. He says some think an A3 it's too restrictive in the amount of
Mhm.
information that can be put on a single page. How do you navigate people through that?
Yeah, the first thing, two main thoughts. One, let your first day three and second and third be messy and long and longer than a page. Like, do not, you own the A3. It doesn't own you, right? Like it's scaffolding. It's meant to support you. So break the rules, right? And then it's kind of like music. You're learning to play an instrument. It's going to be really bad and not sound like music at first, and then it's going to sound like music. So let your first few A3s be messy and long. I'm a writer, so they're always verbose and there's very few visuals. Thank God I love data because there's data, but otherwise it's just a whole lot of sentences. And let that happen before you pare it down, before you edit it down. But then also I would say this piece of like, there is a power, allow yourself to stretch and think about the power of the idea that if you can't get it onto one piece of paper, you might not understand it. That's a Toyota thing that I was taught is any project or initiative or problem that you need to solve, if you can't get it down to one piece of paper, you don't understand it. Now that at first I sort of balked and I was like, but when you really sit with that, it's a fun challenge and it helps you cut out the noise. Lastly, it doesn't mean that you can't link to a bunch of other docs. So when I documents, so when I started working with electronic A3s, my current conditions, I have a bunch of hyperlinks to charts and graphs and Excel docs, right? My plan, if I'm saying the three main things I'm going to do, three main goals, and then the experiments I'm going to run to achieve those objectives, it links to a whole bunch of things when I want to show the detail. So just because your core A3 is one page doesn't mean that you can't have supporting documents and tabs. And weirdly, remote work environments opened that up for me. And then the A3 served a dual purpose for corporate America, which was just helping people get past file organization issues. Instead of wrestling with version control and folder trees, they were like, bring me to the A3 because then I can click on what I need to click on. So it's an organized knowledge management tool as well.
Yeah, I like how you said that. You own the A3 doesn't own you. Um, all right, I think we have time here for one more question. This one does not come with a name, but the person asks, what are the best practices for sharing A3s across the organization to scale up when it reaches a tipping point with lots of A3s flying around?
I think I hope I'm understanding your question correctly. I'm kind of in the same dance myself right now. Two thoughts to keep in mind. I always think of that beautiful image with cascading A3s, right? You want to aim for this. Not every organization is a org chart like this, but you want to aim for connected A3s no matter what that talk to each other. But you don't want to stop people from using the A3 thinking process, even just for themselves. So you don't have everybody to a few things. Everybody doesn't have to have an A3 in an organization. Usually it's just for major initiatives that tie up to, key, OKRs, objectives and key results, or the top line goals. But then you don't want to stop people from using it for their own development, their own thinking, their own collaboration. But separate out those two. You should have some kind of visual or sense of how your handful of A3s or 20 A3s connect. Ideally, it's obviously going to be really hard. Not everybody works together, but you should try to connect strategies as much as you can, whether or not you have Hoshin Kanri, right? Whether or not you have cascading A3s and daily management, you should try to connect things and then also encourage your team members to use it as a tool unto itself. It's not going to be a perfect process. It's going to be messy, but aim for connective tissue wherever you can build it.
Awesome. And that actually wraps us up right on time. Thank you again, Lex, for
Thank you all.
delivering this awesome presentation. And thanks to
And
everybody
stay in
here for
touch.
joining. Yeah, head back to the lobby and head to your next session. Thank you so much.
Take care.